Hey y'all, it's Demointe Wesley here, the facilitator of community education with Amplify RJ. I'm so excited to announce that over the course of Black History Month, I'm going to be facilitating a workshop on the history of Black abolitionist politics and action. We're going to get together every Saturday over the course of February to learn about political history of Black abolitionists so that we can deepen and refine our own understanding of systems of anti-Black violence, and so that we can truly build together a more liberated future for Black people and all people. So come join me. I'm so excited to have you. Bye.
This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives.
Hey folks, I'm Elise, your producer, and today we are welcoming Chimdindu to the podcast. Chimdindu is a 17-year-old high school senior at North Star Academy in Newark, New Jersey, as well as a local youth activist. A lot of her activism centers around educational equality, Black liberation, prison abolition, and eradicating medical racism and implicit bias. Chimdindu offers a really unique perspective as a student who's actually been through restorative justice practices in her school. Without further ado, let's get into this episode.
Chimdindu, welcome to This Restorative Justice Life. Who are you?
I'm Chimdindu. I'm 17 from Newark, and I'm a young person exploring restorative justice.
Who are you?
I'm a Nigerian immigrant. I live in an urban city, and I'm always learning and exploring.
Who are you?
I'm a person who loves community, loves sharing laughs and stories with other people.
Who are you?
I'm an only girl in my family, and I spend a lot of time around men and hearing other people's point of views and their shared experiences, and yeah.
Who are you?
I am someone who loves to read and loves to write about my experiences in ways that make me feel comfortable and are authentic to my voice.
Who are you?
Currently a high school senior, just trying to figure out college applications and life after you graduate.
And finally, who are you?
I'm someone who just loves life and loves waking up every morning with the possibility of learning something new and not really having like a set to stone schedule every day. So.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to explore some of those things that you shared. For our listeners, you might be like, whoa, we've got a young person on the podcast. It's the first young person since episode 2. Griffin, oh, I take that back. Elise is still a young person, but she's in college now. I digress. Chimdindu is here because a little while ago, I came across an article she wrote, speaking of your writing, an article that you wrote in this publication called Chalkbeat from Newark, right, your city, and it's titled, "Here's What Happened When My, quote, no excuses, unquote, school piloted a restorative justice program." So when I saw that and saw a young person was the author, I was like, oh, we've got to see... We got to hear from the youth. We got to hear from the young people. I guess we'll start there. What inspired you to write this article?
So first off, thank you so much for having me. What really initiated my article was the experience I had within school. That day, as you read and as other people, I hope, get to read, it was definitely a shift in the environment that I had been so comfortable in before. As well as you mentioned, my school's no tolerance policies. That really set a whole idea in my head that I had to write this down. And even before the publication, I did write it down, but I didn't, flex it out as much as I did in my essay. But yeah, like I made note of that day every day after, because it changed how I saw how much restorative justice was needed in our spaces. And also with the Chalk Week, just the opportunity that I was given right after it happened, I knew that that was something that I wanted to let the world hear. And so that's how my essay or my publication came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will link it in the show notes for folks who want to read. But folks are maybe listening in their car, washing dishes, doing laundry, working out while listening to this. So can you describe the situation that you were talking about and the environment that your school had been before that?
Yeah, so I had been in a class. It was an African American histories class, which was a very, very new class to our curriculum, into my school itself. So in that class, I was very comfortable with the teacher, just very comfortable with the idea of learning about African American studies and just what is the African American identity. And it was one day we were working on a project, and it was about resistance of enslaved folks during like colonial chattel slavery. And I had to upload something from my phone to the computer, in which there was kind of like a lack of communication between me and my teacher, as my teacher thought that I was like, on my phone for reasons that were not related to work. But I responded in a tone of, just like correction of like, no, yeah, I wasn't on my phone just for doing that. I was doing my project. And that kind of created it was like a pause in the class environment. It was more of like, whoa, like what just happened? And then from there, I was like, given an email where I was asked like, I was given different methods that my school were given to me to like choose from in terms of restorative justice, or just like I forgot what they call it. I think it's like I don't remember what it's called, but they basically were piloting the restorative justice program in terms of the disciplinary system. And they wanted to use my incident, even though it wasn't as big as other incidents could be. They wanted to use it to, kind of kickstart it. And I had a meeting with my teacher with other peer advocates, and then, created harmony again and just talking about it. And it definitely opened my eyes to just so much of the possibilities and being actually in a restorative justice space, which is so different from just reading and theorizing about it. So
yeah, I want to break that down a little bit. Just looking at the article, right? You got quote unquote caught with your phone. Like the teacher thought you were like messing around off task in class, and was like, "Hey, put your phone away," and you were like, "But this is for work," like with a tone right back, right, a defensive tone, and that set off this chain of events. As you were, you described the tension in the class, and things kind of moved on. When you got that email and were offered this restorative conversation, I'm going to say quote unquote, what were your thoughts going into that? Because to what you shared, like this hasn't been something that your school had been participating in for very long.
Yeah, so it was initially when I got the email, I was definitely, I would say I was still in a defensive attitude. Like it was kind of like I did not see where I had went wrong. And I felt initially that it was like they were trying, well, they as in like school authorities or the disciplinary team at my school were trying to make the situation bigger than I thought it was. So at first I was taken aback because I didn't think it was something that was so pressing that needed a whole email to be sent to me. But yeah, and like you said, to my school's policies, I was like, this is very like my school. Like at the time or before this time, they like to blow things out of proportion. So it was just like, I was like, this is very normal, but not normal in a way. Like I didn't know what to make of it. And I didn't know, what my next steps were, because I didn't know if I was going to go back to that class with the same feelings of just like comfortability within that space. And yeah.
Yeah. And so you went into that situation like pretty apprehensive. While you were in there, how did your attitude shift?
It shifted to the point where it was like I was feeling supported and like my voice actually mattered. And I think that's where I was very appreciative of why I was sent the email in the first place and why the whole situation occurred in the first place. Because our meeting was with peer advocates. So I had an advocate who, a friend of mine who was in a class, and all the other peer advocates there too were people that were in the class. But yeah, they advocated and we just shared our experience of what actually happened and how we all saw the experience. So with that, I felt like I said, my voice was heard and that I was valued, because usually with discipline at my school, it was more of a teacher corrects you. If you respond, you're at fault. There's not like a conversation that happens between the teacher and the student. It's more of like obviously you're the student and you're younger. So obviously you're I wouldn't say aggressive, but you're at fault here. And when I was in that space, I was not at fault. It felt like everyone was holding accountability for like what transpired, and it made me feel really good, which was something that I was very shocked and surprised that I was going to come out the meeting feeling. So
Yeah. And, just hearing your experience and knowing that, like, in that environment where adults are always seen as the people that are right, no matter what, like, that's a departure. And I think for a lot of us who came up through school or came up in homes where, like, that was often the case, and to be in a space where older people, right, are taking responsibility for their role in the situation, right? Your teacher apologized, you acknowledged your part in it as well. You're able to move forward in a good way. You say in the article, like, everything in class the next day, was okay. How has the relationship with that teacher progressed since then?
even before the incident, I had a really good relationship with the teacher. And after the incident, I think our relationship kind of strengthened in a bit, because it separated us from like the teacher, like student type, like dynamic. And it was more of like, we were seeing each other as actual people who had feelings and who, um, who make mistakes and stuff. So it definitely strengthened our relationship, which I'm very, very thankful for, which is odd to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about how, you talked about there was a relationship to start with. What were the things that she had done to build that relationship to the point where you were, one, willing to go into that conversation with her, but two, like, afraid of, like, having irreparably harmed that relationship?
Um, so she was just authentically her. I think that's and she is authentically her, which is something that a lot of teachers or a lot of students feel that a lot of teachers aren't, especially within like school systems like mine, where it's like teachers are very like, they have to follow like a strict guideline of like, this is what you do when you enter class, this is how you monitor students and stuff like that. But also being that her class was an African American histories class, she was just her, I don't know, it was just her aroma and just how she was as a person, as someone who was accepting and who was like, she was Black, which is also something very important to say, which a lot of us don't have that, figure within like teacher figures in our school. Like we don't have a lot of Black teachers who can relate to us in that level. And so I think it was just like her just being authentic was something that really drew me to wanting to, seek like a relationship with my teacher outside of like our, the academics and stuff. And just her also being easy to talk to. Like I'll always come to her with like new ideas of like new stuff I was reading or new ideas for class and stuff like that. And it was just, I think that and just her openness also were stuff that made me feel comfortable with her, and comfortable to share things and just comfortable be in spaces with her.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, right? When we talk about restorative justice, at least from my perspective, right? It is about that repair of harm process, but when there isn't a relationship to repair in the first place, that makes the process a little bit more difficult, right? And so that proactive thing, the proactive things that both she and you have done to build a relationship to start, makes that process so much easier, right? And a lot of times in schools, when folks come to ideas of restorative justice, it's just like, oh, that's what we do when kids are bad, right? That's what we do to avoid suspension and detention, or get the suspension rate down, or like break the school to prison pipeline. And I think that's true, 100%. We want to do that. But if we're just being responsive and not proactive, right, both in the relationship building, both in, hiring staff that is representative of people who are in the school, we're not doing the best we can as far as building community rooted in equity and trust. I'm curious how you've seen restorative justice play out across the rest of your school with other teachers and with other students.
Their introduction to restorative justice, it came with the students advocating for just more equity, which is, I love the word equity, but it's more equity within our school, and also just more representation and more student voices to be heard, as we're a charter school, and within the charter school, there's a lot of zero tolerance policies, and there's a lot of punitive discipline systems. And that really kickstarted their restorative justice approach, because after the students advocated and after students were calling them out and they were seeing students were like, disagreeing with policies and were actively, going against these policies, they knew that the right thing to do, and even just like the moral thing to do, was to find solutions that were involving students. And it came in the appearance of like just more restorative spaces. I know that there's some other students after me that have like been in spaces like I was in. And so I think that's also one of like the key things that my school is doing now and trying to expand on doing. And also like with our discipline system itself, usually we do send outs, which is like if a teacher says like they remind you to do something once and like you're not like, cooperating, or you're not like
Air quotes.
not, yeah, air quotes, yeah, cooperating, or you're not like doing what you're supposed to, air quotes again, they send you out to the dean. And as you know, like deans are more of the discipline like authority figures within the schools. So after these dean send outs, you get like these reflections where you fill out what you did wrong, which is so crazy, but you fill out what you did wrong and what you could do better in order to make your day better or whatever. And so I've heard from students that there's less of this going on in my school. Like there's not as much dean send out, because also teachers are trying to maximize learning time, because with dean send out, you're losing time from education, which is another big thing of punitive discipline systems. Is like with the more students that you're sending out and the more students that you're reprimanding and more students that you're, giving disciplinary actions to, you're wasting precious school time, like this education time that we come to school for. So yeah, that's one of the things that they stopped doing, or like did less of, because they saw how harmful it was also to have a student come into the dean and automatically be seen as the perpetrator, or be seen as the person who was guilty, and not understanding the full context of like situations. So I think there's also just been a lot of learning. I also know from the leadership side, there's also been a lot of just spaces that the teachers and leadership has to learn more about restorative justice and to learn more about solutions that are not rooted in punitively like disciplining students, which is something that I think is very, very important, which creates like a harmony within a school, because we're not always getting, we're not always being seen as the criminals, which is such a crazy word to say in school, but just not being seen as people who, are guilty of doing something, which I think is, it's so important. I can't keep saying that, but it's so important.
Yeah. Instead of being seen as criminals, what are you seen as?
We're seen as students. Yeah, we're seen as students. We're seen as people who are eager to learn, people who are also humans, because students are humans and we're seen as people who, like I said before, make mistakes, and people who are ready to be held accountable, but also are ready to have the other people who are also in these events with them being held accountable too, if you get what I mean. So it's like we're seen as just students, which, yeah.
I know it's wild that you're saying those things, right? Like, of course we are, but it's mostly adults, older people listening to this podcast, right? And I think like to hear these things from the mouth of a young person who has felt these things, whose peers feel these things, like what are we doing with our school systems? What are we doing to what is it that we're doing that make students feel like it's us against them, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we have so many things that we're all up against together. And I think, there are a lot of things I often talk about in the workshops that I facilitate where teachers and people who work in schools are also working in systems that don't treat them like humans either, right?
Yeah.
Both on a lot of it is seen as a labor issue, right? Teachers are underpaid, expected to do too much, and definitely want to acknowledge that. And people who are harmed often replicate the harm that is happening to them. And so how do we make sure that we're creating those spaces to see each other as humans, right? And so when there is harm, there's something to restore back to. I'm curious what your like if there's specific, I'm not asking you to air out like your friends and like spill the tea on like whatever is going on with them specifically, but as a whole, your friends, your peers, how have they been reacting to this restorative way of being taking place or starting to grow in your school?
Trying to like word it in ways that not as like attacky, but there's a mixture of like reactions from the students. So for some of the students who are more versed in the ideas of restorative justice and discipline systems and how it affects like Black children specifically, I think they see it as the school trying to save face, and like trying to not necessarily right their wrongs, but more of trying to make themselves look good, which is something that like it's a very real like opinion and a very real like thing that people think. But I don't think it's like everyone that thinks this, of course, but there's also some people who are very appreciative, because when you're someone who has not really been at the forefront of these discipline systems and not have been in these dean offices for like days on end and not have to like go to ISS or just in school suspension or have to do out of school suspension, for them, like for that person who hasn't gone through that, like to you, it may feel like the school is trying to just like, they're not really doing things to help. But for the students that actually go through that, which I've had conversations with, it's a major difference for them, because not having to feel like you are a target, because I've heard from students themselves that they felt like they had a target on their back within my school. And now that like things are a little bit different, like they don't feel as like targeted as they were before. I think that for them, it's a game changer, and it actually helps them to, really feel comfortable in these educational spaces, which I think is the most important thing when you're in school, is just to be able to feel comfortable within the school that you're in. So I think it's just really just a difference of experiences that causes people to have difference of opinions. But for the most part, people are very like, they see it. They do see the restorative justice approaches. And even coming back from school, because we had virtual learning last year and coming back in person, people were like, yeah, the school's different. Like the teachers were nicer and people were more understanding. And I don't know if it was just because of COVID and just like how virtual learning went, but I also knew that, it had to do a lot with the shift in the environment of like how the school was structured. And yeah, so it's a mixture of opinions, but I think the overall consensus is definitely there's a change, and there's whether it's a change for the school to like, to save themselves, or whether it's a change actually to care for students. I know it's a change in the right direction, because at the end of the day, it's only serving students, because the students are not being penalized and they're not being criminalized in schools, which is also crazy to say again because you're in school. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I know you learned a lot of that language around criminalization of students from Monique Morris's book, Push Out. What stood out to you from that learning?
Within Monique Morris's book, she talks a lot about just the criminalization of Black girls in schools, and how they're most likely to be penalized for things like uniform infractions or just behavioral infractions, which causes them to have a setback, and or educational gaps is what the term that they use. And seeing it at like the forefront, and seeing it with your own eyes and from people within your school, that really made the difference for me within the book, and made certain experiences that Morris highlights within her book stand out, as she like uses a lot of anecdotes from students and from Black girls in school districts that are underserved. She talks about how like I know she used one experience of a girl being sent to like alternative schooling, and how she felt like there was a lack of teacher understanding and a lack of people listening to her voice. And then seeing that in my school, where obviously my school's not an alternative school, but it's still a school in an underserved community, and seeing how even friends of mine have been in situations where their voice has been severely neglected, and they've been penalized for like crazy crazy small infractions, or things that are not as big as the school makes it. And so I think that just really made the difference for me within reading the book. It was just like seeing how real it is. And I really thank Morris for just capturing the reality of school for a lot of Black girls who don't get the spotlight to share their experiences, and aren't as like regarded in these conversations of like, how do we move forward with, the educational system and educational racism, and how does that show up in, the real life and where we are today. So
Like you were saying, it's one thing to read it. It's one thing. It's another thing to live it. And as you're about to leave high school, what is your hope for future students at your school, and across, we'll say, the country, as we continue to navigate world in times where folks are still disagreeing that these experiences happen?
So I would hope that students continue to advocate for their needs and their voices to be heard, in whatever way that is, whichever way is most authentic to them. Also, that schools like mine implement more sessions or learning spaces, but I think those do help, but I don't know. I want them to learn and actually understand why it's necessary on a scale larger than just being in school. Because that was something else that I had to learn about restorative justice, was that it's not just schools, it's a bigger thing than just being in school. And so I feel like once everyone starts to make those connections, that's how the change starts to happen. So I really just hope those connections are made, in spaces that include both teachers and students, and also just like around the country, just like, schools continue to implement less punitive, like, discipline, and they just like, they're not criminalizing students for things that are not as big, and they're continuing to listen to students and to adapting to the growing needs and concerns of students, all over.
So you're just about to exit high school, going into the world with all these ideas about restorative justice. Where do you hope to see this work grow? Where do you hope to grow this work as you move into adulthood?
I hope to use it to change as many systems as I can, with one being the medical system. As I hope to like encourage spaces to be had within patients and doctors and executives within these hospitals, who can actually learn from each other, and learn about the needs of patients, one, and also the needs of the workers. Because I've seen a lot, and I've heard from even family members who work in the medical system, of how there's just such a there's a dynamic between like all different parts of the medical system, and like how there's like it's not as equal, and there's a bunch of inequities within it. And just like being able to give people the opportunity to, you know, come together in community to work to have the medical system as equitable as possible for everyone. Also within educational spaces, where just like the continuation of just having students like at the forefront of their own change and having their priorities met when it comes to just like access, just like, you know, just having comfortability and feeling valued in their educational spaces. And also just like branching into the criminal justice field as well, as like, you know, which a main priority, not a main priority, but a main part of restorative justice has been just like, you know, working with people who have been in the prison system and people who are currently in the prison system, and having them and the families of people who've, you know, I don't want to say act like committed violence on, but people who've like just been like, you know, these exchanges with each other within the criminal justice system, and having them just like being spaces where their emotions and their feelings are heard, and coming to like a place of just understanding with each other. Yeah, like I think it's also it's something that's ever changing for me, because like I say, I'm always learning. So I'm always just like trying to figure out like how do I make the world a better place today. So it's like I think there's so many things that we could tackle on with restorative justice, but like those three have been something that I've just been thinking about, helping with, just like, you know, having spaces that make people feel like they're valued and heard. And
Yeah, the possibilities for this work really are limitless, infinite, and that's why for me, like wanting to amplify restorative justice into all spaces is, you know, what I've dedicated my life to. I love what you said though about, you know, at the end of that answer where, you know, you want your life to be about helping folks. You know that not everybody in the world thinks that way. Where was that instilled in you?
I think it's just always been instilled in me from a young age. Yeah, just like also my background. My mother, she's a nurse, and my dad, he works with other people, servicing to help to create infrastructure that's like accessible for everybody. So it's like just from them and just their attitudes and just everything that they've taught me since I was young has just always been to like care for other people and to want to help people, and however small it is, and however like you know, however it may be, they've always just taught me that helping people should be one of like my main priorities.
So before we get to the questions that we ask everybody on this podcast, I want to give you the opportunity to ask somebody who's a little bit older, who's a little bit more experienced in this work, any questions that you have about restorative justice or this work in general. Lay it on me.
So I was just wondering, is there like anything else like social justice wise that you would want to do or like try to dive into? It could include restorative justice, it could be a mixture of that and something else, but is there anything else? Then, you know, just Amplify RJ, which is beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think on one hand, like Amplify RJ is enough right now because I think restorative justice fits into so many spaces, right? A lot of the work that we do is within schools, and with people who are working in education. But I imagine this work in so many other places. By this being a podcast, like I want there to be a lot more media that represents restorative justice and restorative justice practices. And I know it doesn't always make for like good drama, but like it's real, and like being able to tell stories with these kinds of themes infused into them would be really cool. I don't necessarily need to like star, write, produce in any of those things in media, but more representation of these ways of being that are more about reconciliation than being punitive than getting vengeance would be huge. I know a couple episodes back we talked about a project that we supported, the short film Sippin', coming out soon, that was talking about the experiences of restorative justice practitioners of color with white fragility. And so, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be as heavy-handed as that, where we're explicitly saying restorative justice, but just seeing more restorative themes in media would be wonderful.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Now to the questions that everybody who comes on here answers. In your own words, define restorative justice.
I think restorative justice is just the state of wanting to restore harmony, but also harmony that is acknowledging the differences in the ways systems like play into how like inequality show up within our society, but when wanting to like, you know, change these systems and restore that harmony, like I said before, and just a space of learning and understanding and growth, which I think are all three big parts of restorative justice.
Let's imagine you get to sit in circle with four people, dead or
Mm-hmm.
alive. Who are they? And what's the question that you ask the circle?
One, it would be bell hooks. Two, it would be, I feel like, oh, I Chance the Rapper. This is such a weird curveball. Three, it would be James Baldwin. Oh, Monique Morris. Yeah.
All right, so
I,
it's Bell Hooks, Chance the Rapper, James Baldwin, and Monique Morris. What is the one question you ask that circle?
just why are they geniuses? Like, what's the, I don't know, what's the secret behind it? I don't know, just also, yeah, just how they come up creatively with all of their work, which is something that I indulge in frequently and I love. So yeah.
Sometimes, and you didn't know this because I didn't prep you for this, sometimes I turn this question back onto the guest. So,
Yeah.
Chim, why are you a genius?
Whoa. I've never had someone ask me that. I think my capabilities to just always want to learn more. And with learning, I mean like listening and reflecting, which I think that's what a lot of people don't tend to do when they learn and don't tend to open themselves up to. But I don't know if genius is like the word for me, but I think it's just something that I just love learning and I just love seeing things that I learn about come to like actual reality. So
I don't know if I can quite say this about Chance, but when I think about the writing of Bell Hooks and James Baldwin and Monique Morris, right? They're
mhm.
learning, reflecting, and creating and sharing. And I think you're well on your way.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Um, what is one thing, an affirmation, a mantra, or something that you want everyone listening right now to know?
Two affirmations that I think that are very important are one for yourself. I repeat to myself all the time that I am love and that I'm capable of harboring love and always learning how to love others and love myself more. And two is to listen to the youth voices that are coming into restorative justice and that are doing the work in their schools and in their local communities to, you know, make restorative justice and restorative justice spaces more accessible to everyone.
Who's one person that we should have on this podcast? And you have to help us get them on.
Ooh, yes, I think that you should definitely have. So, like I said before, I am currently in a program called City National Leadership Project, um, which like they do a lot of social justice work and restorative justice work. And I think that the director, Tanae Howard, amazing, amazing, love her. I think she's someone that you should definitely have on here because her knowledge obviously surpasses mine, but just her experiences and her love for everyone that she comes in contact with and the work that she actually does with the youth in our community, and wanting to see the youth voices heard, and curating spaces that harbor and amplify youth voices. I think that's something that's like, I think the world needs to hear. And I would definitely try to get Tanae on. She's very booked and busy. So, but I know she'll always make time out to, talk to you. And I think that's also something that I love about Tanae. She's always like down to earth, and yeah, so.
And before we go, how can people support you, Chimdindu, in the work that you're doing in the ways that you want to be supported?
So I think it would just be to support my next essay coming out with Chalkbeat about HBCUs. So I think that's something that I would greatly appreciate if people read and just, reflected on as well. So yeah.
We'll definitely have the Chalkbeat and your previous work linked in the show notes below. Thank you so much for sharing your light, your energy, your stories. It's really been a privilege to get to honor the young voices of the next wave of this restorative justice movement. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Chimdindu. It is great to be able to feature youth voices because oftentimes these voices are overlooked, and as you heard today, they have so much to offer. Thank you again, Chimdindu, for all of the things that you offered us today. Some things that stood out to me included when Chimdindu was talking about the relationship that she had with her teacher before and after she went through restorative processes. I think the key aspect is that she had a relationship with the teacher beforehand so that she was able to restore the relationship. I think this can be a great message for all educators to remember to connect with their students. It will help both of you in the process to be able to form a relationship based on care, mutual respect, so that you will be able to restore the relationship if anything happens, and so that you can have a lasting relationship that goes even beyond the short time you may have them in your classroom. Also, don't forget to check in with your students. We always start off this podcast by checking in with our guests, and you can do the same with your students because showing them and giving them the opportunity to express their emotions is a great way to connect deeper with them and also to teach them the skills of sharing emotions and sharing who they are because students have so much to offer, just like we heard today. Now it's our job to stop, listen, and amplify what we're hearing. As always, thank you so much for tuning in this week, and I'll see you next week.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. Or if you're old school, tell a friend. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, signing up for a community gathering, workshop, or course. So many options. Links to everything in the show notes, or on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.